This is an oral history with Bob Del Pizzo.
Right.
Is that the right
Yeah,
pronunciation?
that's pretty close.
And do you like to be called Bob or Bobby or?
Bob's fine. Bobby, it's fine.
Okay, fine. And this is an oral history for the Carnegie Library Oral History Project and the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum. And today's date is August 29th.
July
July
29th.
29th, yes,
July 29th.
2004.
Oh, that's my birthday, August 29th.
Oh.
And so maybe that just happened. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you just remember
Maybe,
that.
right. And we're doing this oral history in Mr. Del Pizzo's house, his gazebo. Okay, as I promised, the first question is when and where were you born?
I was born in Louisville, Colorado on August 29th, 1935. And I attended schools all through there, graduated from Louisville High School. And then I went to work for, after I graduated from high school, I went to work for MROHP Company for a couple of years. And then, I was married in 1955.
Uh-huh.
And
Just backing up a little bit, was your family, what kind of work did your father do?
My father was a coal miner,
Uh-huh.
and my mother was a housewife. And
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother, Nick, and one sister, Netta, and they're both older than me. And my parents, my father, he migrated from Italy in 1921 at the age of 19, and my mother was born in this country right after my grandmother and grandfather also immigrated from Italy. And so both of my parents originated from the Italy origin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
there was
like
quite a settlement of Italians in Louisville.
yes, there was. He first came and he settled in New York for a little bit, worked on the docks, and then he worked in the coal mines in Pennsylvania for a little while, and then he went to Penrose, Colorado, and Round Canyon City, and worked in the coal mines there. And then he met my mother, who was living in Louisville at the time also, and then he met her, and then he married her, and then he moved to Louisville, and then they lived there ever since until they died.
Yeah. And was your mother of Italian?
Yes, her name was Romano. Mm-hmm. Her last name was Romano. Mm-hmm. And let's see what else I can. She died, and she was very young. She died in 1963 at the age of 54, and she died of cancer, with tumor on her leg. And then my father, he lived to be the age of 91, and he died in 1993.
Uh-huh.
And,
so you went to school then in Louisville?
Right, and I graduated from Louisville High School. Uh-huh. And then after high school, I went to work for Gates Rubber Company for a couple of years, and then I got married in 1955, and then I attended the University of Colorado for a couple of years. And then after that, my daughter Nikki came along, and my wife was supporting me and going to school. And so she was working at Rocky Flats at the time, and then she quit on Friday, and I started on a Monday. So that's how I started working at Rocky Flats, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Uh-huh. Now, were you still in attending the University of Colorado?
No, I stopped going, and then because she was pregnant, and my daughter was born in April, and I started in December of '59, and she was born. No, I take that back. I started February 2nd. Of '59, and she was born in April of '59. Uh-huh. So there wasn't much time.
So in a sense, your wife and you just traded places.
That's right. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Do you know how your wife? How did she happen to start working at Rocky Flats?
Well, she started. That's when, in 1953, she graduated also from Boulder High School, and she worked for the telephone company for a while, and then she attended the university for a year, and then. The jobs came open up at that time at Rocky Flats, and there were good jobs out there, so that she decided to go to work out there, and she started to work out there when we got married in 1955.
And what was she doing there?
She was working in payroll.
Uh-huh. So you were familiar with Rocky Flats partly?
I had an idea, yes.
Yeah.
I had a pretty good idea.
Uh-huh. Did you know other people that were working there?
Oh yes, a lot of Louisville people that worked there, and some of the kids I grew up with, and a lot of the old timers. Well, I don't know if they were real old timers, but a lot of the people that I grew up with in Louisville were working out there. So Rocky Flats did employ a lot of people from Louisville, Lafayette, and from Boulder, and I knew a lot of people in this whole Boulder County area.
Yeah. Just going back a little bit, did you study anything in particular at the University of Colorado?
I was in geology.
So when you decided you wanted to work at Rocky Flats, did you put in an application, or how did that go?
Yes, I did. I put an application in. I think through the help of my wife, I was hired on out there. At that time, they weren't hiring very many. At that time, it was pretty well closed up. But it just happened that maybe it's not what you know as people you know, and she kind of helped me get the job. And she was very well liked out there, and I think she had a very good boss, and I think he kind of helped me get the job. His name was John Stram, and he was the head of all of the accounting and business section of Rocky Flats at the time.
Is that STRAM?
Him.
So when you applied, did you have to go through the security clearance?
Oh yes, I did. I had to get a Q clearance.
What was that like for you?
Well, it was no problem. I had nothing to hide, and I thought it was good. I thought it was actually a privilege to have a Q clearance, because at that time Q clearances were pretty high on the list, and I was very grateful to have one.
And there was no, did you have to wait a while?
Yeah, I think I had that done prior. It probably takes about 6 months, I think, or within that period of time, to have all the clearances and the paperwork done before you can get hired out there at that time. And
Now, were you going to school or working at Gates Rubber?
I was going to school at
You
the
were going
time.
to school.
I had quit Gates Rubber Company, and
you moved from going to
from
school
from attending university, I went to Rocky Flats.
Yeah.
And
What were you hired on as? What was your
the
position?
first job I hired on as a janitor. I worked as a janitor in a building 440. Let's see, I think it was 440, and or 444, excuse me. And then I worked there probably 3 months for a nice gentleman. I was thinking, I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, I worked for him for 3 months, and then I bid on a job and on another job, which was a material analyst in Building 91. And I worked there probably 3 months, 3 or 4 months, because I started in the lab. I think I started in the lab in November or December of '59, so there was a period of probably 6 months, roughly, that I worked as the janitor and material analyst. And then
Now, as I understand it, a lot of people went on as janitors just to kind of...
That's
as an entry
the
level.
most hourly people that went into the plant started as a janitor or a laborer. All of the people started right there that didn't have a degree or was a professional of some kind. And they started there, and then these jobs would come up on the board, postings, and then you would sign the postings, and then you were able to take the tests, and if you qualified, then you move on to these different jobs.
So you'd actually go look at the bulletin board or something?
You look at the bulletin board every night. It seemed like you would look at the bulletin board. Every time you come out or going home, they'd have a big bulletin board at the time clock area. They had a big, where you'd run through and you would punch your time clock, and then they also had a bulletin board where they had all the postings listed, and then you could bid on the job there if you were interested in moving up or whatever. So that's how that started. But you had to qualify also. You had to have time, and then you also had to pass the the test that qualified for that certain job.
So your first job was janitor, and then you moved to...
To a material analyst, and that was in building 991. And then I signed a posting for a lab technician, and then
That's what you really wanted to do?
that's what I wanted to do after I got at the plant, because that's what I really had liked to do, because I liked that type of work, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
How
started.
did you know that you liked that kind of work? Had you had some
I'm-
science courses?
I like sciences, and I'm a kind of meticulous type of person, and being in the laboratory is that type of work. You have to be very meticulous and very careful in doing your job, and that was right down my alley, and that's the reason why I stayed with it, and I loved my job. And I went to work. I started in building 881, and I started working for Robert Ranke. He was the immediate supervisor. I mean, he was the overall supervisor, and then Hunt Allen was my foreman. And
Ranke is R-A-N?
Reinke.
And
He's now deceased. And Hunt Allen was also, he was my immediate supervisor.
Allen?
Allen, and
First name is
Hunt.
Hunt.
And I started working with them, and I just started through the progression and worked my way up. And
Can you describe what a typical day would have been like, or was like, then in the work that you were doing?
well, I can tell you when I first walked into the laboratory and started my job,
Good.
I was overwhelmed because I thought I was way in over my head, because I saw all these apparatuses and everything, and I was actually a little bit scared. But by talking to the technicians and in my supervision, I overcame that, and it really worked out well for me. And I started working with quality chemists, and they kind of took me under hand, and I learned an awful lot from certain chemists. And one particular chemist, his name was William S. Polkinghorne, and we worked together for 19 years. And he, Polkinghorne, and he was a chemist out there, and he graduated from the University of Colorado, and he taught me so much. In fact, as later on, as I got more experience, he used to let me do a lot of things that the chemists that he would do, because he felt that I could handle the job. And I got to where I was making a lot of the standards, doing a lot of the graphs, and he just gave me whatever I could handle, and he let me do whatever I thought I could handle. And so I owe a lot to him. But there were a lot of good ones. I mean, it just one, Bill was, I worked with him for so long, and he kind of showed me the ropes.
Can you explain for people who might not have any idea, what kind of lab work is done at Rocky Flats? Can you give us some idea of...
This was an analytical lab, and the analytical lab, what it is, it's a support lab for the production of what goes on at the plant. And all the production work that they do out there has to go through the lab. It has to be everything, most everything, and I could be corrected on this, but I think that most everything that they do in production has to be okayed by the laboratory on making sure that everything is up to snuff and everything is done right, and all that all of the suppliers of the materials and everything that is being sent to the plant that meets the qualifications of the plant. And so we had to okay everything, and then
So you tested out various things before the production of the...
Well, production would go on, but they would send samples from production, and then we analyze them, and then once we analyze them, then if they were okay, then they could go on farther with whatever were they doing, and then if it wasn't, then they had to correct their problems, and then they would resample until they got whatever they were doing was right, and then we would, through our analysis, we would give them the okay to do whatever they had to do. So a lot of depend on the results that we give them, what they could do and what they couldn't do. And but a lot of weight was put on the laboratories, because they had to make sure that they were doing a quality job in order for the production to do their job. And a lot of the vendors, this was later on in the labs, the vendors that would send in some of the material that was being used for the production, they had to meet qualifications, and if their material didn't meet qualifications, we wouldn't accept it, and then they couldn't accept to use it. So we had to make sure that our analysis was up to par, and made sure that all these vendors were sending in the right quality stuff.
Now, did you work with on what they call the cold side or the hot side?
I was on the cold side.
So 881 is on the cold side.
881 is on the cold side, and that I don't know how much what this is classified or anything, but most of the stuff that we handled was on the uranium side, and on the hot side was the plutonium side.
Right.
But there was a lot of things that we handled in the laboratory that was fairly radioactive,
Yeah,
as they refer to hot.
Yeah.
That was the term that they used,
Yeah.
was hot. But
hot always means radioactive,
that,
right?
yes,
Is that right?
that's right. And if it was hot, it means it was very radioactively.
And did you have to wear any kind of protection
We
some
yes,
of the time, or all
we
the
wore
time?
yes we wore coveralls all the time, and we used a lot of rubber gloves, and once in a while, depending on what type of material or whatever we was working with, we'd have to wear a face mask, a compo, what they call a filter, a respirator type compo would just fit on half of your face, and we would wear a respirator. And but in that particular building, we didn't get into the full suits like they do down in the hot area.
Yeah.
But we did sometimes, but not very often, because we had another thing. We handled the material that we handled was very in small amounts compared to what they were using in the 700 complexes, and we were just doing small amounts of analysis, and but some of it was still pretty radioactively, and we were working with solutions, and we were working with dry material and metals, and we did the whole thing. But
was there ever any danger that you or the other workers might be contaminated, even though you're on the cold side?
oh yes, we did.
That was a possibility.
Oh yes, we did get contaminated, and we also once in a while we'd have to go to medical to get cleaned up, as they say, and get decontaminated. And and if you ever got a cut or something like that, any type of a wound, any type of an open wound, you were automatically sent to medical and to be checked for radioactive material, radioactive contamination, or again, they just didn't want anything like that to happen. So it was very good the way they run their operation, because sometimes you didn't want to do that. You didn't. When you get a little cut, a little nick, you say, well, it's nothing, and you'd hate to go to medical, but you always had to.
Did you personally have experiences with being contaminated?
Oh, I got contaminated
What was
every
that?
once in a while.
What would that? How did that happen in the lab?
Well, a lot of times if you were working with, you'd be working in rubber gloves and you'd be working with glassware and setting up an apparatus for an experiment. Why you might be trying to force a piece of tubing through a rubber stopper or something like that, and it might break on you and cut you, or you might be, we'd work with a lot of different uranium metals. You'd be cutting chips up and the uranium would cut you. And you just like an everyday thing, just little things can happen. I mean, whatever you're working with, you just. But a lot of times it was with glass, trying to prepare operations and make a new setups, and glass would break on you and you'd get cut, or you'd be running the experiment and something might crack on you or get on you. Spill.
Yeah. Did that, how did you feel about that at the time it happened? Was it kind of scary?
No, after a while, going back, but there were very few, the first few weeks that I was out there, you're just afraid to touch anything. This was when I was a janitor. You were kind of afraid to touch anything because you just didn't know, and you thought everything you touch, your hands were hot, and I always made sure to check them pretty regularly and everything. But the longer you work with the material and got to understand what was going on out there and the way they did things, and that I overcame that, and no, that didn't bother. I was never scared, never after that. I wasn't afraid of it, and you have to respect it. That's the thing. You have to respect with what you're working with, but never be afraid of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you probably had some training about how to handle hot materials and.
We'd have special training, and we'd have these classes, and also then in order to move up in the progression of in the laboratory, you had to study and make sure, because you would take examinations in order to move up in grade in the laboratory from a lab technician to a lab tech B to a lab tech A to a senior lab tech, and then maybe salary personnel after that. So
and did you do some of that progression?
I did it all.
So you moved from.
I moved from lab tech all the way to the top, and that was through, like I say, through studying, but through the help of the chemists that I was working with, and there was a lot of good technicians too that you work with, and they pass on their knowledge to you, and you just carry it through. So, but there was lots of good people that I worked with. And I can't.
So you started out as a lab technician there, and then what is the top? Is that?
That's my clock going off.
Yeah, the birds.
The birds. You asked that question. The senior lab tech, senior lab tech was the top, and that paid the most money.
Yeah.
The lab technician, you start at a certain rate, and after you were there a little while, you'd get small increments, and then and finally by passing these tests, and the tests were very hard. You had to study for them, and they were 2 days they were 3-hour exams, and you had to do 2 days of them. So they were just like taking a college exam. A final on a college exam was 3 days on each day. So you had to study, and you had to know the material, or you couldn't pass the test. And but there again, like I said, through the help of all the good people you work with, I think that makes your job a lot easier. And their progression program was very good out there. The program that the Rocky Flats had at that time was very good.
Mm-hmm. So basically, your whole time that you started in '59, and I believe on the phone you said you retired in.
No, I started in 444. You mean in
19?
Oh, 1959. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. And then you retired in
1995. So, and
and you were a lab.
I was a lab
technician
technician from 19th, I would say, the end of November of 59 to 1995. And all that time was spent in 881 building, in that laboratory. I seen it,
the whole. Was it in the same laboratory then?
well, it started, and it was in the same laboratory, but when I first started in 881, they had it was a very, they had one section was the chem side, and they had another section across the hall. I'm kind of forgetting here a little bit, was what they call the emission spectroscopy lab, which dealt with the oxides, the oxide part of the uranium, and then on our side where I started was what the chemical side was, dealing with solutions and doing that kind of analysis. And then I eventually got into to work on the emission spec side, I guess about 10 years after being on the chem side. I worked from time to time on the emission spec side, but when I got into emission spec, that was what I really, and I probably spent all of my years in the emission spec, and that was what I really liked. I liked it all. I mean, we did all kinds of type analysis. We had the best equipment money could buy. The government gave us the best equipment, and we had all kinds of different analysis. And I enjoyed all that type of work, but emission spec, after I got into that, I thought that was my favorite. And that's when I became, I'm not saying an expert at it, but I became, I think, very good at, because I liked it so well.
Yeah. Could you describe what emission spec means to someone who wouldn't know what that meant?
Well, it's, being not a chemist, I probably can't give you the right definition of it, but it's where light is emitted from an arc, and it's passed through a set of prisms on what they call a spectrograph. It's a big instrument, and light is passed through there, and it's given off, and it goes through a set of different prisms, and it bounces back and forth, and it eventually ends up on what they call a photographic plate. And then each element has an element like iron. Iron has so many lines. There's they call them wavelengths, and their light is emitted in certain wavelengths, and these elements give off different wavelengths. And then what you do is you make a set of standards of the material, the type of material that you're using, and then you shoot, after you get your standards all made, then these standards have known amounts, parts per million amounts with different things. And then you would shoot the material that you were trying to analyze, and then what you would do is, after you shot these what they call shots on the spectrograph, then you would develop your photographic plates, and then you would take them to a comparator, which is another machine, and then you would compare them with your standards, and you could tell how much iron, how much calcium, or how much chromium, or whatever element that you were looking for. And at that time, certain things you would be looking maybe for 14 elements, and some you'd be looking for 26 elements, but everything was based on comparing with a standard.
Mm-hmm. I see. Mm-hmm.
And
and so actually each kind of thing was kind of a problem. You'd be given this kind of analysis to do, and then
well, a lot of it, some of it, especially in the production part, a lot of it became routine type. Some of it was routine because you would shoot a lot of different, like uranium. You would do a lot of uranium shots, and you would get those fairly often during the week or whatever. But then, but a lot of times they would send in material that was unknown, or they wanted to know what it was, and then you could shoot it. And then we had special standards that we made up and that we could compare and check it out and find out exactly and tell them exactly what they were looking at, and that would help them in their production. Like if they come up with a problem, they couldn't figure out why something wasn't going right in their production, then they would maybe chip off something or bring it down to the lab and say, we have this material here, but we don't know what it is, and we have to find out what it is. And so we would take it and analyze it and run it through the spectrograph and compare it, and then we could find out exactly what they have in most cases. And it was very, and another thing, it was very quick. It wouldn't take as long as if you did a chemical analysis on it, because chemical, it draws it out. By the time you dissolve it and everything, it's a long period of time, where we could take it and shoot it you would grind it up or whatever you had to do to get it a fine powder, and then shoot it on the spectrograph, and then run it on the comparator, and then give them a result. And you could do that within hours. I mean, depending on the material that you had and what you were working with.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when you started work there in 1959, that was after the 57 fire. Did you ever hear about
I heard about that fire, and actually there was one fellow that was working in our lab. His name was Leonard Holman, and he worked in our lab, and he was one of the victims of that fire.
Oh.
And he...
that name is kind of vaguely familiar. Holman?
Yes. And he got a body burden off of that, and he was no longer eligible to work in the hot area, and that's the reason why they shipped him to... But he was working, if I'm mistaken, I can't remember if he was... I think he was working in that lab when I started there. Or he might have been in 441. He might have been in 441 lab too.
So
I think he was in 441 lab. There was another lab. There was 441, 881, 771.
He got the body burden from
the fire. Yes, he did.
From fighting the fire, or
no, he was working in the area at the time.
I see.
Mm-hmm. And I think I don't know if he was working production, or if he was a chem operator at that time, or he was working in the labs. He might have been a chem operator at that time, and then he went into the labs, I think, in 441. I wouldn't swear to that because I'm not sure.
Did he die later?
No, no, I don't know if he's still living or not, but he retired from Rocky Flats, but and I can't remember the year he retired, but he was still living that time, and I don't know if he's still living or not. He must be, because I never have seen his name in the homesteaders.
Now, let's see, at the time of, can you remember much about the 1969 fire?
If I think is that where Mr. Campbell, his name was Mr. Campbell, is that where they were cleaning parts in the tetrachloride baths, carbon tetrachloride? I'm not sure if that was the one. I think that was the fire that Joe Campbell was his name, and he was an operator. He did work in 81 for a long time as a chem op, and then he worked down in the 700 complex, and he was cleaning parts, and somehow in carbon tetrachloride, and I don't know what happened to it, but I don't know how the fire got started or what happened, but he got a very bad body burden too, and he lost part of his hand, a finger, and it was very traumatic for him too.
Yeah, yeah. Now, the 1969 fire, as I understand it, although, I mean, it kind of caused a lot of attention to the plant because it was so expensive to clean up.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the way you remember it?
Yeah, I think it brought a lot of attention to the people. There was the people on the outside. I think they thought a lot of the contamination got out through the stacks and everything. But I think as far as Rocky Flats was probably one of the safest places to work because they took so much care and being careful about what they did. I think when they first come out there, a lot of things they wasn't sure about. Like the storing the barrels out on the pad, they've had a little problem with that here, getting rid of that in this cleanup. But I think at that time they didn't really know about all the things that could happen with radioactive material. But as time went on, they took care of everything. And I think to me, Rocky Flats was the safest place to work. It was. They were very good about it, keeping everything under control, and it was a safe place to work. At least that's what I saw.
That's what you saw,
Mhm.
yeah. Were you involved in any part of the cleanup after the 1969 fire?
That fire, the '69 fire was. I know what that fire was. That was in 779 building, and I was on the fire brigade at that time, which is a group that we used to meet once a month for training and everything to kind of help the firemen.
Oh, so it's kind of volunteer?
It's a kind of volunteer, and we used to meet once every 2 weeks or once a month. I can't remember exactly, for training. And then anytime something would happen, if they needed our help, then they would call on the fire brigade. Well, it just happened on that fire was on Mother's Day, and it just happened. I was at my mother-in-law's at that time, and they did call for the fire brigade, but they didn't get a hold of me because I wasn't home. But I had a friend of mine who that I run around with, and he's a very good friend of mine, and they did call him. He was on the fire brigade, and he worked on that fire, and he was in there for a long time. And yeah, that was a bad one. But and at first they didn't know how the fire. I guess they wasn't sure how to handle it. They wasn't sure just exactly how to put it out. But through trial and error, they came and they stopped it. But yeah, that was a bad one. But they cleaned it up real well, and. And I don't think much of the contamination got out.
And you weren't involved in that cleanup?
No, because
The lab people, were they not involved in that?
we were involved in the sampling. When they did the cleanup, they would take samples and then they would send them to the labs. But a lot of that was sent down to the 71 labs. And some of the samples would come to 881. But a lot of that material was on the plutonium side, so that the 71 lab handled the plutonium.
I hadn't realized that the 71 building had their own lab then for the plutonium. And
Oh yes, yes they did. The 71 had, they handled everything on the plutonium side, and 8081 was mostly the uranium side.
Yeah.
And other things.
What else did 881, what did the building, well, first of all, what did it look like? Can you describe it?
Well, it was, at that time, it was, before they built 371, I think it was the biggest building on the plant side. And most of the building was underground, and so all you could see was just the dock, maybe just the south end of the building was just sticking out. It wasn't very much of it. It was just the dock area, and that, I wouldn't say very much of that was sticking out.
So
and
you
most
would
of
go
the
in from
rest.
the dock?
No, they had a stairway coming in from on this. They had a side. They had two side entrances that you could come out, and then on one side of the building. Then they also had another entrance on the east side of the building. But most of the building was all underground, and it was, I think it was, let's see, it was probably 3 or 4 stories total underground. It was about 4 stories, and I'm not sure it was. I'm sure it was 4 stories on some parts. Maybe not all of it was under 4 stories, but a lot of it was under 4, and most of it was under 3, I guess. But it went way back into the ground. And so it was everything was underground. The only time, if you wanted to see what the weather looked like, you had to walk out on the dock.
Yeah.
We was just very fortunate. The lab was close to the dock. It was on the south end of the building, and so if you wanted to go see what the weather looked like, you just kind of take a walk out to the dock and see what the weather looked like. Otherwise, you'd go in the morning, and if you didn't come outside, you never see the sun or anything. But that was something over the years you just got used to it, and if you get involved in your work, you really don't think about what's on the outside. And so it really didn't bother me that much because I was so involved in my work. And but yeah, you could walk in on a very, very windy day, and you go down the valley, you wouldn't hear the wind at all, and come out at night and be calm. Or the wind is still. I've seen the wind blow out there so hard that sometimes they'd have to walk hand in hand because you would get blown over, and missiles from the things that were just on the plant site would blow, and it was very. The winds would get very hard out there at times, very, very hard. And a lot of cars would get sandblasted, damaged, and they always. The insurance companies probably didn't like it very well.
But so when you would go to work, you'd go down in and you wouldn't even know it was blowing then?
Once you got into the building, no, because the walls are so thick and you just never even heard it.
Yeah. Now, was the whole building labs?
Oh, no. We were just one part of the...
I see.
They had production.
Uh-huh.
They had a big machine shop. They had production. They had...
And by production, you mean actually the plutonium buttons, or just an aspect?
No plutonium was on that side. It was all uranium side. But they were doing different things in the production line. And we used to do, like I say, we get a lot of samples from the production part.
Uh-huh.
And then they had machines. They had a big machine shop there also.
Uh-huh.
And the biggest machine shop was in 444, but we also had a machine shop. And
the machine shop was, do you know what it made? Or?
Made parts.
Uh-huh.
They made different parts for different components. And, as I was working out there, I always thought, it was a good thing, but I would always, in the back of my mind, I would hope that they would never have to use anything like that because it was so deadly. And
you mean the nuclear weapons?
Right.
Yeah.
I hope they would never have to use them, but it was a very good deterrent.
Uh-huh. Did you ever think yourself about, what they were making?
I had an idea what they were making, but and then most of that was classified, and you didn't have a need to know, and they wouldn't tell you, and you wasn't supposed to know. The only thing you were supposed to know was your job, but some of the things you worked on, you would kind of get an idea, but a lot of that, you didn't really know what was going on out there. All you knew was we were a weapons plant, and we were making weapons of destruction, and that's all you were supposed to know. You weren't allowed to walk around and just go anywhere you wanted to go. I mean, because when you went from one building to the other, you had to have another different badge. You'd pick up a different badge, and you had to have a clearance to go in some of these other buildings, and you had to have a need to go in some of these other buildings because you just wasn't supposed to be there. And if you were there for a certain reason.
Did that ever present problems in terms of the work? I mean,
no, I don't think so. No. I was trying to think of, but they were very strict on what you see here, you leave here. It was one of the, I think, is kind of the model here. What you see here, what you You leave here, what you hear here, you leave here, and you didn't take anything outside that plant. And you didn't, when you went home or you didn't discuss this with anybody, not even your family. You didn't discuss your job.
What kind of impact do you think that had on your family? I mean, your wife, did she
No, my
know
wife,
that-
of course, being my wife worked out there, she had an idea.
Yeah.
And so she knew I worked in the lab, and we never discussed it. We never discussed my work as far as what I did, and then because I wasn't allowed to do that, and I never did discuss it. And even with my daughters, they knew I worked out there, and they knew that I was in laboratories, and that was the type of work I did. But they didn't know what I was doing,
Yeah.
what I was working with, or anything, because I never discussed it. And that was part of the code that when you go in there, that with that Q clearance, and that's why you have that Q clearance, because it's for people that they can trust.
Did it help your wife having worked out there? She
Oh, I
kinda
think
had
so.
that context?
I think it helped her understand what was going on, and she knew, and so it made it easier, I guess. And maybe that's why she never did ask me any questions about what I did, or like I say,
Did your kids ever wonder? You have
I have 3 daughters.
3 daughters.
Hmm. And no, they never did really question me. They just knew I worked in the laboratory, and that's I think they let it go at that.
Uh-huh.
And they never really did get into, and I think they knew, because I think I told them at one time that everything was classified and that I couldn't talk about my job. And then once they knew that they never did question it.
How was it for you when the protesters started coming in, I guess it was the late 70s?
Well, I didn't like it, but I guess that's their freedom to protest as long as they want to protest. But because I didn't like it because I didn't think they really knew the whole process that was going on out there, and they didn't know everything. Maybe they thought they knew, but in my opinion, I don't think they knew.
Mm-hmm.
And but I guess they have that privilege to protest, and as long as they're not harming anybody or doing anything that type, I guess they have that privilege, and I guess I'm not against that. But it became a problem when coming into the plant a lot of times when.
Did you have to go through?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. We have to go through it a lot, but we just
Meaning
kind
you
of
drive through,
and you just kind of look at them, and you wouldn't say anything to them, or they wouldn't. You just kind of go through, and of course they were more out on the highway, out on 93 highway, where I came in from the west side, and they couldn't only come so far. I think as far as they got is the railroad tracks, which is not very far off of 93, Highway 93 then. But they didn't really pose a problem. I mean, we got through, and they didn't cause us any damage or anything like that. Sometimes they get verbal, but I think you can live with that.
Uh-huh. Can you remember anything they said?
No,
Uh-huh.
that's
Do
quite
you think your fellow workers got pretty angry with them?
Well, I think some of them did. But I don't think they ever did anything about it. I mean, they just accepted it and went on and did their job. They didn't like it, I'm sure. Nobody liked the protesters, but it was something that happened, I guess.
It seems to me one fellow that I talked with said it kind of felt like you were under siege. Would you have described it that way?
Well, it didn't feel like we were under siege. For me, it didn't. I just felt that they just didn't really know the whole story about what was happening out there and why were we doing this. We're trying to deter. It was a good deterrent about building nuclear weapons, and in the back of my mind, I I hope that they never had to use them. I mean, I always had that in the back of my mind because just what happened over in Japan and that, you could see the damage that would be done, and I always thought if it ever happened to get into a nuclear war, it's going to affect this country, and I never did want that to happen. But I think it was a good deterrent, and I think we had to have it, but I never did want them to use it. I mean, that's my feeling. I'm just not that type, and I just hope that we could settle it on a more peaceful thing, but I think we had to have it at that time. I think it was necessary.
Now, I believe, from what you said, it sounds like you didn't have experience yourself in being in the service, in the military service.
No, I was drafted, but I was 4F due to an accident I had when I was a 10-year-old.
Oh.
I had an accident, and so I was rejected. I was drafted. I had to take 2 physicals, and this was after I was married. I was married a couple of years, and I did get drafted, but they said only in time of war that they would take me, but I didn't pass a physical. And,
let's see. I'm trying to think about. We're supposed to be asking specific questions about buildings, and I think you've described Building 881, pretty well. It sounds like there were a number of things, and there were some labs, and there was some production.
And later on, after, I can't remember when it happened, but they closed down one side of the chem side of the building, and they moved it over into the emission spec side. And so they combined that area on the would be across the hall, and then where we had our lab, they gutted the whole lab, and then they moved accounting and payroll and some of the people who were doing data entry and stuff like that, and they moved all those down into that area. And then so payroll was right across the hall from us, and payroll, accounting, and some other, I can't remember exactly all that was in there, but it was all out of the business side of it. And they moved that down from Building 11. And then later on, they moved that out of there over into 860 building. I think that was the number. Yeah, 860. But yeah, there was a lot of different. There was a lot of different things going on in Building 881, and a lot of people worked in the building, and a lot of people in and out. I mean, as far as they didn't stay long, they might have moved through different areas, but they worked there for a while and moved to a different job or something, or moved down to the hot area or 700 complex.
Now, you mentioned when we were talking on the phone that you kind of kept notes on the different people that you worked with.
Yes, I kept a list of all the people. I started a list of all the people I worked with, and I started from the day one that I started, and I looked that up the other night. I have that list, and I think it was 376 people that went through that lab since I was there, and that's a lot of turnover in the years that I worked there. But a lot of them, some kids, some were summer students. They'd come for the summer and work summer jobs, and they'd leave, and then some would only come maybe if they got hot and if they got contaminated down below in the 700 complex in the labs or something, and they had to move out. They might come and work in 881 for a month or so or whatever. So I considered anybody that I ever worked with as part of it. And so, but most of those people that I have on that list worked there from at least a year or more. So, and a lot of them were really, really nice people. Very nice people.
Now, when you started the work at the lab, were you an hourly worker at that?
Yes, I was.
point?
Mhm.
And did that change at any time? Or?
I guess it changed. I went into management the last 3 years I was there.
Oh,
I
so you'd been hourly until the last?
I was
3
hourly
years.
up until that time.
Mhm.
Did have an opportunity, I must have been in the labs probably, well, I'm guessing 8 or 9 years. And then they approached me, Al Williams was his name. He was a chemist in 771 labs. And through my supervisors and through him, they approached me about taking a salary job in the 771 labs. And I went and checked it over, and it just, 771 lab just wasn't 881 lab.
Uh-huh. How was it different, and how did you feel about it?
Well, 881 lab was it was a lab that was very unique, and you did things, you had to be very, I can't put my finger on it, but 771 was just haphazard. To me, it was just stuff all over the place. It was crowded, and it was just, I just didn't like the environment, and it wasn't so much that I was afraid of the material that I would be working out. It wasn't that or the people. It was just that I walked down there, and I'm just not that type of person. To me, things has got to be pretty well up to snuff, or I'm not comfortable. I guess that's the word. When I walked in there, I just wasn't comfortable with it, and it was
The
just,
processes didn't feel as...
yeah, it was just, I guess to me it was like, in 881, I was working on a Cadillac. When I was down, if I would have gone down to 71, I was working on a Model T. I mean, maybe that's not a good comparison, but,
Are
We've
we
got
meeting?
3 minutes left on this
Okay.
tape.
Why don't we change it now?
Okay.
Because it's a good idea to leave it. This is a continuation of the oral history with Bob Del Pizzo, and we'll just pick up what we were talking about.
we were talking about, I had a chance to go salary about 9 years after I was working in the laboratories, and when I checked it out, I went down and checked it out, and like I said just previously, that I just didn't feel comfortable with the job, and I just didn't like, for me, 881 was unique in its way, and it was very clean and everything, and to me down there it wasn't, and I just couldn't work in that environment, so I told them no, I didn't. I'll stay right where I'm at, and I was happy. But 3 years before I retired, there was an opportunity for me to take a supervisor's job, and I thought by taking the supervisor's job it would be good for me because it would help my pension, and actually my pension doubled by going salary, so that was probably the biggest thing. It was good for me because.
And did you start supervising?
Yes, I had 50.
There was a really change
I had
in your
52
role.
technicians working for me.
Oh.
So,
Did you enjoy that?
I loved it. I loved it. And like I says, when I retired in 1995, I really wasn't ready to retire, but I could see the writing on the wall that things were coming to a close. Things were slowing down. I was working a lot of overtime, but I could see what was happening in the plant. And they were making, the packages were going to stop giving the packages as far as retirement packages.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I'll check it out. And I thought, well, I better take it.
Yeah.
And
So it was your choice, in a sense.
it was my choice in a sense, but it was very hard. I had a hard time for the first 3 months after I retired. It was very hard for me because I was kind of depressed because I was working a lot of overtime when I was as a supervisor. I was putting a lot of time in there, but I really enjoyed it. And then I quit on a Friday, and then come Monday, nobody wanted me. It's kind of hard. But it took me about 3 months, and my wife was hoping that I'd get over it. And it took me about 3 months. And as gradual as time went, it got better. But it was very difficult for me. I have to say that. It was hard. And if you're not ready to retire, I would suggest that to anybody. If you're not ready to retire, don't do it.
Yeah. How old were you?
I was 59, and that's too young.
Yeah.
A lot of these kids retire, they try to retire, but to me, I would have worked. My father worked until he was in his 70s, and I think I get that a lot from him.
Mm-hmm.
But
now your father did work in the coal mines, right?
yes, he worked in the coal mines about 38 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they closed down just about the same time?
Well, they closed down. Yeah, they closed down. Actually, they were closing down about the time Rocky Flats was starting to be built, because during the summertime when the mines would close, because the coal miners didn't work too much in the summertime because they didn't sell much coal. Then my father, he would work on construction or work on the farms. And then he was working on construction, building he was building one of the buildings out at Rocky. He was working out at Rocky Flats, and then he got hurt out there. They had one of the cement buckets. The guy who was operating the crane let slip off a brake or something, and he got hit with one of those big cement buckets, and hit him on the arm, and he couldn't go back to the coal mines after that because he had 9 operations on that arm. And then so he after a while, he took a job with working at the restaurant, at Kalachi's restaurant in Louisville, and he kind of took that over, and he kind of was doing all the meat cutting and making all the sausage and stuff like that, and kind of working there, and he did that until he retired.
Mm-hmm.
And he enjoyed it, and it was very good for him too. But working, when he got hurt out of Rocky Flats, it kind of ended his coal mining.
Yeah.
But
now there's a lot of fellows that work at Rocky Flats that came from coal mining families, aren't there?
that's right, a lot of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
all have kind of any contact with each other? I mean, was it sort of a special bond? Or?
Well, I think it's a special bond that you have the people you grew up with, and some of not the old timers, but the people in between you and the old timers, and it was just like a close-knit family. Of course, at that time there was only about maybe 2,000 people that lived in Louisville at that time, and then until all this building that has gone on, and now Louisville is not the same city, as it was when I grew up, but that's progress, and you have to move on. And yeah, and I still see a lot of the old timers, and a lot of the old timers have gone, they've passed on.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I interviewed one fellow. One of the early interviews I did was Richard
Franchini.
Franchini.
Yes, I know Dick. I've known Dick. He graduated with my sister, and very nice gentleman. And I've known Dick ever since I was a little kid, and I still, when I see him, I speak with him, and we have a nice little talk. But I only see him like at funerals or weddings or something like that, because that's the only time a lot of people get together that we see each other. But
now were you a member? You must have been a member of the union.
yes, I was.
Uh-huh.
I was United Mine Workers at that. They had the steel workers, the United Mine Workers, and there was another one there when I first started.
Did you have to join the union when you first started, or?
Well, I think it was. I was thinking.
Union shop?
Yeah, I think it was union shop, and I was always. My dad was always union man,
Uh-huh.
and I guess I'm a union man, and but so that was no problem for
Did
me.
you feel that the union helped the?
Oh, very
hourly?
definitely,
Uh-huh.
very definitely. We had some. Well, yeah, well, for the most part, the leaders in the union were very good, and I would say the Kelly boys have done a lot for the people out of Rocky Flats, and not just the Kelly boys, but there were a lot of people that work on the negotiating committees and that were the union higher ups. Why, I think they did a good job. But no, for the most part, I mean, not everything is going to go perfect, but for the most part. They did us right, and I remember when I started. When I was making $1.35 an hour, if I remember right, and the salary is way up when
Yeah.
in the union when I went salary. So they made a lot of progress in those years, and so.
Was it difficult to move from being a union member hourly to salary?
No, it wasn't, because I think I understood after I got into management. I understood both sides, and I think that's why I got along so well with the people that worked for me, because I knew how to. I think I knew how to deal with them because I'd been there, and I treated them the same way I wanted to be treated. And I think that's what happened. I think so. I had no problems with any of my people that worked for me. They were all, well, most of them were pretty good. I would say for the most part. You have your problems once in a while, and it's not a utopia. But overall, it was very good. And like I say, I hated to quit. And
Now, during the time you worked there were some changes, like, for example, I know that women and minorities began to be hired more
Mhm.
in production and so
Mhm.
forth. Did that have an impact on you and in your work? Mike?
no, it didn't bother me. No, I worked with the minorities, and I got along good with them. I got along good with all of them, and I had no problem with any of them. And as far as women, I had no prejudice against women, as long as they do their work. But when a woman works in a field with men, like in that type of particular jobs, they got to carry their load though too. I mean, I don't expect any more of them, but I expect them to do their share, And then I don't think we should. I don't think they should have any more privileges than a man. I mean, if they're going to draw the same pay as a man in that field, then I think they should try to be as productive as the man. Not any more, but I think they should be. And I didn't have any problem with them.
Did many women start coming into the lab where you worked?
When I first hired, there wasn't any. When I started in the 881 building, there was only 2 women in the lab, in the building. They weren't in the lab. One was a secretary to the building head, and then the other one worked in the office there too, somewhere. But one was a private secretary to I can't remember his name. I can see him, but she was a tall, thin girl, and she worked as his private secretary. And that's only 2 women were in the lab for a long. I mean, in the building. Excuse me, not the lab, but in the building for a long time. And I guess I should mention too. At that time, there were no vending machines. You couldn't, no papers. You couldn't have any type of newspapers or anything like that. You couldn't bring any.
You couldn't bring a newspaper?
Oh no, no, not for a long time the years that I worked out, in the earlier years. No newspapers, no books, no magazines, no anything. You couldn't bring anything like in the only place you could ever eat was in the cafeteria. You couldn't eat in the laboratories, or no food was allowed anywhere other than the cafeteria. And when we used to work when we was working a lot of overtime in some of the real process work, why we was eating a lot of TV dinners, because they didn't have any place to prepare that. They had a cafeteria there and they had everything there, but they never did use the kitchen until later on. Later on, I can't remember exactly when that came in, but we ate a lot of TV dinners. I remember that, but it was all right. We looked forward to it. And but no, you couldn't. You just didn't bring anything in. You couldn't have any candy bars or anything like that. You just didn't. And the only time you ate was at lunchtime, and or maybe at break time. They had, when you take a break, you could have your whatever in your lunchbox or something. But
Yeah. Did people ever violate that? Sneak things in?
no, I don't think so. I think they were pretty good. But I'm not saying they didn't, because
You didn't.
I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there was probably a few sneakers. I mean, as far as reading material or stuff like that, but no, but later on, as it got toward the end of the plant, they got more lenient, and you bring your newspapers, and they used to have their breaks down. They had a little break room in the lab. They set up, and so they got more laxed. But the first years.
Was that after production stopped, or was it before that they got more?
That was after production stopped. Production stopped in our building. We didn't have any production really, because they moved it to a different. Some of that they moved to Oak Ridge. The uranium work they moved to Oak Ridge. Some of it, and then some of it they moved down into the hot area. But
Did the end of production affect you? I mean, did you have feelings about it? Was it hard?
No, because we were into a different thing. We were doing more. We weren't doing so much production as far as on the production that was going on in 81 building, but we were more supportive of what they were doing in 883 building, and then in some of 440, 460 building, and also some of the work that was going on in the 700 complex. We were just doing, a lot more of doing analysis of what the vendors were sending. So it was more of a support, but we were doing more what.
You mean, would that have been things that were relating to cleanup?
No. This was still production, but
It was still.
but it wasn't the type of production that we were, that we were used to doing, like in the uranium. They were they were still doing some, but we were doing more of a miscellaneous type of analysis for. We were doing a lot more soil samples, we were doing a lot more water samples. We were checking more the environment.
I see.
Our lab we started doing more reservoirs. We were doing Ralston Reservoir in Walnut Creek, and we were doing all the wells that they had out there. We analyzed all the deep wells and all the water. We were doing a lot more of water samples and a lot of environmental work. And
Yeah. Now that would have been then after. Was that after EG&G came in?
Yes.
Yeah. Because I had the impression that environmental stuff was.
It was starting to come in when EG&G, right, and we did a lot of soil samples, we did a lot of oil samples, and waters. We did a lot of waters, all different, all kinds of, making sure that we weren't contaminating any of the streams, underground water streams, and our lakes and reservoirs. And we wanted to make sure our environment was good. So we were doing a lot of that type of work. And then we were also doing a lot of beryllium work.
Checking for beryllium or?
Oh, well, we were checking, we were doing a lot of beryllium samples that they were sent in from different buildings. And we were also doing a lot of the vendors that were sending them with beryllium that they were sending to the production areas. We had to make sure that the beryllium that they were sending was pure, is like they said it was, or meet the qualifications that were set up. And we did a lot of that. But we did a lot of miscellaneous work compared to what we did in the earlier years. In the earlier years, it was mostly the uranium analysis and working with different, some other stuff, but most of it was uranium in the earlier years. And then it just kind of spread out. And then when they closed 441 lab, they moved 441 lab down into 881, and that's when we really expanded, because that's when we got into a lot of things that we normally weren't doing. We were doing mostly uranium, but when 441 came down, we still were doing a lot of uranium, but they brought a lot of the different types of analysis with them when they come into our lab. And so we picked up on that, and then environment analysis came, and so we did a lot of that. And so it really expanded, and we really did a lot of different things.
When the FBI raid came, when the FBI raided, what was that like for you? I mean, where you were working?
No, I didn't. I guess they're doing their job, and I guess I didn't really give it much thought. I just.
Did your work get stopped?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
No, it didn't. It didn't seem to affect us too much.
I guess maybe I've heard it was more having to do with the production in the 771.
It's probably more in the 700 complex, and with security. I think a lot of it, when they brought in those, I think it was a lot of it to check on the security aspect of the plant. I think that was a lot of it, but I'm not sure of all that, what was going on. There again, I didn't have a need to know, so when you don't have a need to know, they don't tell you, you don't ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you kind of try to just keep your nose clean and try to just stay out of people's way and just do your work and have fun and enjoy your job. And yeah, it was a kick. We really used to have a lot of fun too. I mean, we had a lot of fun. When we'd be working in the lab and be in the weighing room where we weigh a lot of samples, so we'd have to do. We were doing weighing. We covered all the world processes and what was going on in the world, and discussed everything from everything to sports to politics, and we really get in some good discussions, and it was just a great atmosphere.
So there was a lot of camaraderie.
Oh, so we solved a lot of problems, but they never came about. Yes, it was a lot of. In fact, it is, and I keep in touch with a lot of the people that I work with today. I mean, because I cherish the friendship so much that I don't want to let it die, and we just had some. We talk and we reminisce about the old times, and it just we had a lot of laughs, a lot of laughs. It's just a good place. It was a lot of fun. And people say, well, how do you stand working in that building with no windows and walls? And when you're working, you You don't notice it if you're doing your job. You just, you, I guess I just used to close everything off. I was in my own little world when I was out there. I mean, I get involved in my work, and I would never think about what's going on outside, because I get so involved in what I was doing, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't the perfect man, or I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it was, but for the most part, it was I just get involved in the work that I was doing, and I enjoyed it so much that it really didn't bother me being inside all the time.
Sounds like it was the type of work that you were well suited for.
I think that I really do. I really do. I think that was my niche, because I just love my work, and I think I would have liked to. I think I would have liked to have done some technician work in a hospital. I think I would have liked that too, but I didn't have the background for that. But I think I would have liked anything that had to do with the laboratory work, and anything that, to me, anything that is fine work, that's real delicate. I'm the type of person, and that's just me. I mean, because that's the type of work I like. I like to. Like I said before, I'm very meticulous, and I like to do work with small things, and see if I can come up with the right answer. And to me, it was a challenge. Maybe for some people, the lab wouldn't work for some people, but for me, it was. I think that was I was meant to do that. I think that's what I was. Let's see.
I sometimes I like to ask people, what do you think was the best thing about working at Rocky Flats, and then conversely, what was the worst? But why don't we start with the best first?
Well, the best thing was, for me, it was a good job, and I got to work with the finest equipment that money could buy, and you work with some of the nicest people, because I think most of the people that worked out there were pretty well cream of the crop. I would say a good share of the people. I mean, they were very well educated. You worked with a lot of educated people, and they were just good people. And I think that was the greatest thing. I think working, it was just a good job, and working with all the fine equipment, and just the people. Working with all the people that I worked with, and getting to know them, and having that camaraderie with a lot of them, and it was family. And I think that was the greatest part. The worst part, I can't really say anything bad about it. I used to think a lot of times, when I'd come out, or we'd come out of the building or something, you'd see all the high wired fences, and with the curled wire on the top. And I think the only difference between the people who work out here at the flats, and the people who are incarcerated in a prison, is that we get to go home at night. That was the only. I mean, I get that feeling, because you were always cooped up.
Yeah.
I mean, because in any place you went, if you had to go out of your building, you had to be escorted, or not escorted, but you had to. It was hard to move from one building to another unless you had to really go there. Because you had to have different badges, and you had to have a clearance to get in some of the other. I mean, you had to be cleared to get in that building. The clearance you had was good, but you had to be cleared to work in that building, or be in that building. You couldn't be in it. Sometimes and then a lot of times when you went into that building, you had to sign in. and we have different badges, or your badge would have a different numbers on it, and it would designate, well, certain numbers would designate certain buildings, and you could go into those buildings if you had a number on that badge. You were allowed to go in those buildings, but if that building number wasn't on your badge, then you weren't allowed to go in. If you did go in there, then you would have to they would give you another badge, and then you would have to sign in and sign out. So I mean, it was all very secure, and I think that was the good thing about it. You know, they did a very good job as far as keeping that place secure, and security was very good. A lot of people talk about, well, it wasn't that great, but I gotta hand it to them. I think the plant was run very well, at least on my part. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I'm speaking for me. I thought the plant was very well operated, and I thought they did their best, and they were doing what they were meant to do out there, and to be a deterrent, to save our country from any nuclear war. And like I said, in the back of my mind, I hope they never used them, but hopefully they never use it.
Did you have any personal worries or worries about friends might have worked in different parts of the plant with respect to health, seeing as you were working with dangerous materials?
I've seen, there was a few people that I worked with that died while I was there, and that, I felt bad about that, you know, but that's nothing you can do about it, you know. I mean, that's life. That's water under the bridge. You have to move on. I mean, life goes on, whether you're here, whether you're there. If you die, well, tomorrow comes for somebody else, and you have to put that under, and you have to move on with your life. And I felt bad when there was different people that died, and one kid that committed suicide, and I felt bad about that, but you just don't know what goes through their mind. But
In terms of the dangers, the radioactivity, did you ever feel that, I mean, it sounds like you felt like they took the precautions.
I think they were very good, and I was never scared of it, but like I says, I respected it, and that was the big thing. I was never afraid, and I respected it, and sometimes maybe didn't always agree with what the things that you had to do, and maybe you thought maybe should have been done different, but they were the leaders, and so you followed the rules, and you did it. But for the most part, no problem, and I was never afraid. And I just respected what I was working with, and took the greatest precautions that I could, that I wouldn't have harmed myself or my fellow workers. I didn't want that to happen.
You didn't work with beryllium, did you?
Yes, I did. I worked with a lot of beryllium. But only small quantities.
Yeah.
In fact, I worked with beryllium oxide, which is actually worse than the beryllium metal, because it's in an oxide form. And we took great precautions on and if we weren't satisfied with some of the things, well, we'd make sure that the safety aspect of the job was very well taken in hand before. If we questioned it, we wouldn't have to do it. If we thought that the danger was there, then we would say, well, we're not sure whether we want to do this yet until you have more precautions, or till you can make a better setup. And then they would look at it, and then they would come up with maybe a better plan, and we could do the job. But for the most part, if you weren't comfortable in what you were doing, and you were threatened by maybe a health hazard, then you could question it, and then they would follow through on it. I'm not saying that they would change it all the time, but for the most part, they were good about it.
Did you feel that there were differences amongst the different contractors? Dow and then Rockwell and
I started with Dow.
Uh-huh.
Then I went to Rockwell, and then from Rockwell I went to EG&G, and then from EG&G went to Kaiser Hill. And
Was it hard for you when Dow went out and Rockwell came in, or was it easy? Or?
no, that didn't affect it too much, and no. Personally, I like Rockwell the best. I thought they were very good for me, and I thought that I was. I want to say it helped me more personally. Rockwell did. But the other companies were good. I had no problem, really had no problems with them. But I liked Rockwell real well.
Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think would be real, is important? Anything that might be interesting to?
I think we covered a lot of it. I probably repeated myself a lot here. Let's see. No. Like I said, I just think bringing Rocky Flats out here was good for the communities of all these surrounding small towns, and I think it was very good for that part.
In terms of the economy?
Economy, it was very good for that part. The economy was very good, and as far as a deterrent, I think we had to have it. And now that hopefully we'd never have to use any of these weapons, and I hope that it's kind of sad to see it go, but I think it has to, and I think maybe it's clear to clean it up and get it cleaned up, and hopefully we can make a nice wildlife preservation out of it, and I don't think people have to really worry too much about it. I think it's going to be okay.
Uh-huh. Is there anything you'd like to ask? Or anything?
No, I've just enjoyed this.
Uh-huh.
So, thanks.
But I hope I wasn't too boring as far as giving you
Oh, not at all.
repeating myself or something.
No, I think it was very interesting to hear about the lab and how that fit into the whole thing. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
This is a continuation of the oral history with Bob Del Pizzo, and he has some pictures here that are from his work at Rocky Flats, and we're taking a look at those. Today's date is
August the 4th.
The 4th,
Mm-hmm.
2004, and we're again in his home. So, Bob, if you could just tell us a little bit about what this picture represents. It is you, is that right?
Yes, this is myself doing an analysis on a beryllium assay, and it's used in the knowledge of finding out the impurities of beryllium, and I can't give you a real detail about all of what's going on about, but all I can say is that the instrument was highly valuable in detecting impurities in the beryllium.
Uh-huh. Great. And this is yourself in, what, 1982?
In 1982.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Great. Now we'll take this one and...
Okay.
Okay, and this is Is this also you?
This is also me, and here I'm using what I'm making right here. I'm marking standards, and these are photographic plates that are used in emission spectroscopy, where we analyze all types of material and using and trying to find out different amounts of elements that are found in these of impurities in the material that we were analyzing. And what I'm making here is the standards as a base to compare our unknowns against these, and that way you can find out exactly the amounts that are in the material that is being analyzed.
Uh-huh. And the material would be put where?
Oh, this is just, these are photographic plates that have been developed, but
okay.
the material and the oxides that have been shot on a spectrograph and run through well, I want to say a series of optics, and then it's onto a photographic plate, and we develop these plates, and then we can take these plates and compare them to the standards that we have known amounts on there.
Okay, great.
Here, again, we're using different comparators here. Bill Polkenhorn here is on the left, and Bob Como is on the right, and that's myself again. And these are three different comparators, but they do about the same type of work. Only on some of them we can we can test the lines for the impurity by measuring electronically, and but most of them are used for visual comparison.
Okay, great.
This is a technician, Burl Taylor. He's doing analysis on beryllium assay, and this is one of the procedures also in identifying the purity of beryllium. On the left here we have Les Shehorn, and the instrument here is atomic absorption. Is Fred Stripling. They're both technicians, and they're doing an analysis here. I'm not sure what they're running, but I think here they're running on beryllium also at this time. But this instrument can be used for a lot of other different things. Okay, this is Fred Stripling again, a technician, and he is working in the water lab and doing some type of analysis over there, and trying to find impurities in the different water samples that we receive into the lab, which are many.
What kind of impurities would they be?
Well, they to try to find different types of elements where you have calcium, magnesium, or whatever those types of elements that we're looking for here, and if there is any contamination also radioactively. But mostly here is just to see what elements are in the waters that from the different reservoirs and from the creeks that are running out of the plant and what have you. This is Ira Meadows, a technician working in the laboratories. I'm not sure exactly because it's too far away for me to see what procedure he is working on here, but it is one of the procedures that we do in the laboratory. Okay, this is Richard Lally, another technician, and I'm not sure exactly what procedure he was running at the time, but it's just another procedure and some of the equipment that we use in the laboratory there. This is Ann Ficklin, a chemist, and she's doing a study on the uranium assay here and doing probably setting up an experiment to find out exactly what the uranium assay procedure takes and what it takes to do this job in the laboratory.
This, I believe, is in 1972?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And this is Delbert Rouse. He's a chemist. And this is Leonard Holman, and he's also working on that beryllium assay analysis on the beryllium. It's one of the instruments that we use. We use quite a bit in analyzing the beryllium there.
And the beryllium would be analyzed for what reason?
To find the impurity,
Okay.
to find how pure the beryllium was, and if there were, and what impurities that we could find in there.
Uh-huh. And that would have to do with, you want it as pure as possible.
That's right,
For the-
the vendors, because the material that was coming in from the vendors had to be to meet the specifications of the laboratory or Rockwell, and in order for them to proceed with the production of whatever they were making. Oh, you want, I
Now,
don't...
I think you said this is a colleague of yours?
Yes, this is Amy Miller, a chemist, and I'm not sure what instrument she is working on there and what she's doing there. But as of right now, what I know of, Amy has been suffering from berylliosis, and she has a serious case of this, so we hope all is well with her, but I haven't heard what her status is right now, but she does have berylliosis.
Would you know have any ideas how she might have acquired it? She was exposed? in the-
Amy did a lot of work with beryllium, and I think that's probably where she came in contact with it, because she had worked with the beryllium for quite a while, for many years, I guess.
And this is the last picture. This is the support to staff?
Yes, we are a support for production and analytical laboratories, and right here we have the office personnel. This is Memory Delforge here on the left, and Shirley Gutierrez on the right, and they were with us for quite a few years in the laboratory, doing a good job in keeping of all the records and of all the information that was being established in the laboratory, and then processing it onto the production people who needed the results.
Uh-huh. And were all of these pictures taken in the same building?
Yes, all these pictures were taken in the 881 analytical laboratories.
Good. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for showing these pictures, and would there be anything you'd want to say in conclusion about these pictures?
No, I think I've covered the area pretty good here, and hopefully I didn't probably do too good a job explaining on the pictures, but hopefully you can get a little idea what was done in the laboratories.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.